Als Adam grub und Eva sprang, Kyrie eleis, wo war denn da der Edelmann? Kyrie eleis, Spieß voran, drauf und dran, setzt aufs Klosterdach den roten Hahn. Spieß voran, drauf und dran, setzt aufs Klosterdach.
Hi, my name's Ben and this is my submission for C++ programming and my game is called German Assault. So the premise of the game changed multiple times actually. The original idea was to have a player versus player tank shooter. Basically each player would face off against each other, shooting each other until one of the players' healths reached 0. This then changed to a multiplayer shooter where players would be stuck in the middle of the map and waves of enemies would come at the players and the players would get points for each enemy they killed, and then the player with the highest points would obviously win. However, this then changed back to the actual original idea just for ease of completion within the time frame. So the inspiration for my game was World of Tanks Blitz and War Thunder, but basically these inspired my game because World of Tanks Blitz has that arcadey feel which my game I think has with the health bar system, to give that more fun aspect of the game, so it's not just like War Thunder where it's a one-shot kill kind of thing. However, I think the atmosphere of my game resembles War Thunder more because it's a lot more realistic and more drab, which corresponds to the game. So this is the colour and sound for my game. The colour themes for my game revolved around the colours used in the military, like greys, khaki greens, tans and this kind of thing, and this gives a very moody and drab atmosphere to the game, which resembles the time period that the game's set in, which is World War II. And then we've got the music that plays in the background, which is actually a German song that originated from around the war, and then this just adds to the atmosphere of the game to give that realistic feel. So then finally we've got the assets. Majority of my assets that I used I did get elsewhere, with all these links that you can see here. The only assets that I made were the shell types, so that's that. Then we have the player class. So basically this is for each player. This is for player 1 and 2. Player 1 and 2 are just create different instances of this class, regarding the different positions and different tanks and things like that. So just at the top, this is just initializing the direction the player is facing, the angle that the player is facing, which will be used for the turret and rotation of the tank, and the player's position and then its width and height, as the tanks are different widths and heights. We then have the initialization, which creates the actual texture for the player's tank, and this takes in a string, which is then converted to a C string, which then loads the player image. Then we have the process input, so we've got the move forward, move back, left and right, depending on the direction the player faces, which therefore you need cos and sine, and it takes in account of angles and pi to then calculate the angle that the player is facing and then move based on speed constant. And then below that is just checking whether or not the player is trying to go off screen, and if it is, it just resets the position back onto the screen. Then we have the health functions. So all this does is it creates the health bar, sets that health bar, it sets a background and a foreground for the health bar. So the background will be red and the foreground is green, and then it sets the foreground to a certain percentage. So in this case it is set to a float which is 1, which is representative of 100%, and obviously this will then get edited once the player takes damage and that percentage will drop. So then we have the hit detection for getting shot by different players. This is called in the shells function, which I'll show later. But basically all it does is it checks the top, bottom, left and right of the tank against the top, left, the bottom and right of the shell. If any of those aren't colliding, it sets collide to false. However, if any of those are colliding, then it obviously sets it to true. And if it's set to true, the damage type of that shell is taken. It's then divided by 10,000 to get it down to a float, and then it's minus from percentage, and then the percentage is checked to see if the tank is destroyed enough or not, and if it is, the texture is destroyed for the tank. So then we have the same thing for the mines. It's literally the same thing as the collision for the shells, other than it takes damage from mines instead. So here we have the turret. Initialization and the main turret class is exactly the same as the player. It takes in angles again to depend on which way it's facing. And then we've got the update. So basically we need to get the player's position to then attach the turret to that player, and then the image center is based on making sure that the turret is centered to that player's tank. So then we've got the shells class. A lot going on here. Shells takes in player and turret. This is as if you want to shoot, the shell needs to come from the turret's position, not the player's position. However, player is also needed to then pass the damage values into the collision functions for the shells. This in the shells in it basically loads the shell pictures, as there are 3 different images for the shells depending on which type you select. This just gets that from the selection and then loads the surface as whichever image is selected. Then we have the if the bullet collides, basically a number will be picked between the minimum and maximum damage, and then on top of that a number will be chosen at random between 1 and 10, and this will be compared against the penetration chance, and if that number is less than or equal to the penetration chance, then the shell will penetrate the tank and do damage. So then we have just the process input things. This takes into account the turret's position and the image center of that turret. And then the A1, A2 and A3 are the different shell types. The if fired, we needed multiple booleans to do the shooting, as I found that if you shot without these different booleans, every time you let go of the shoot button, it would just disappear until you repressed it, and then it would reappear again, the shell. But yeah, this just again gets the same math as the tank's rotation, basically, because the shell also needs to rotate depending on which direction the turret's facing, and this allows for that. And then we can see here the pen chance thing, pen chance math, which then if it pens, it will call the boolean collide, and that will call the player hit function, which will then check if it does damage and things. And then once it hits the tank, it actually destroys the detection. The explosions, which didn't actually work, basically I think it was going through these images too quickly, but basically what it was meant to do is when you shoot the tank, once the shell got destroyed, so like up here where it destroys the texture if it hits the tank, I could call this explosion function, it would cycle through these images showing an explosion animation. So then we have the fences, also known as the mines. So basically what this does is it spawns in, I think it's around 15 mines randomly around the map, which is based on this function here. Basically it's just a simple for loop while the count isn't equal to 15 or whatever number it's set to. It will spawn the mines at random locations, and also checks if those mines are on a player. If they spawn on a player's location, their location is reset. And then we've got the collision detection for those mines. So if a player collides with one of the mines, it calls the player mines function, which then checks all the collision like it does with the shells. So then we just have the sound. The sound stores different WAV files in an array, and then an enum is linked to that sound file. This checks if it could open the actual mixer, and then based on this then concatenates the file path for each of the WAV files, and then loads them. So yeah, that is my submission for C++ game programming.